Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. It's the book reading series, Read with RACHANA, and the day 7 of my book reading series. Saying thank you so much for supporting me in my journey. And in this series, I'm reading this awesome book, Becoming by Michelle Obama. And I'm in the first chapter in the 5th part. So tonight I'll be starting this 5th part. So let's get into it. My mother ultimately did go back to work right about the time I began high school, catapulting herself out of the house and the neighborhood and into the dense, skyscraped heart of Chicago, where she found a job as an executive assistant at a bank. She bought a work wardrobe and began commuting each morning, catching the bus north on Jeffrey Boulevard or riding along with my dad in Buick if their start times happened to line up. The job for her was a welcome shift in routine, and for our family it was also more or less a financial necessity. My parents had been paying tuition for Craig to go to Catholic school. He was starting to think about college, with me coming up right behind him. My brother was now full grown, a graceful giant with uncanny spring in his legs, and considered one of the best basketball players in the city. At home, he ate a lot. He drank gallons of milk, devoured entire large pizzas in one sitting, and often snacked from dinner to bedtime. He managed, as he would always done, to be both easygoing and deeply focused, maintaining scales of friends and good grades while also returning hits as an athlete. He would travel around the Midwest on a summer league team that featured an incubating superstar named Isaiah Thomas, who would later go on to a Hall of Fame career in the NBA. As he approached high school, Craig had been sought after by some of the Chicago's top public school coaches looking to fill gaps in their rosters. This team pulled in big rowdy crowds as well as college scouts, but my parents were adamant that Craig not sacrifice his intellectual development for the short-lived glory of being a high school phenom. Mount Carmel, with its strong Catholic League basketball team and rigorous curriculum, had seemed the best solution, worth thousands of dollars it was costing my parents. Craig's teachers were brown-robed priests who went by father. About 80% of his classmates were white, many of them Irish Catholic kids who came from outlying working-class white neighborhoods. By the end of his junior year, he was already being courted by Division I college teams, a couple of which who would probably offer him a free ride. Still, my parents held fast to the idea that he should keep all the options clear, aiming to get himself into the best college possible. They alone would worry about the cost. My high school experience blessedly cost us nothing except for bus fare. I was lucky enough to test into Chicago's first magnet high school, Whitney M. Young High School, which sat in what was then a rundown area just west of the Loop and was, after a few short years in existence, on its way to becoming a top public school in the city. Whitney Young was named for a civil rights activist and had been opened in 1975 as a positive-minded alternative to busing. Located squarely on the dividing line between the north and the south side of the city and featuring forward-thinking teachers and brand-new facilities, the school was designed as a kind of equal opportunity nirvana meant to draw high-performing students of all colors. Admissions quota set by the Chicago School Board called for a student body that would be 40% black, 40% white, and 20% Hispanic or other. But the reality of who enrolled looked slightly different. When I attended it, about 80% of the students were non-white. Just getting to school for my first day of 9th grade was a whole new odyssey, involving 90 minutes of nerve-pummeling travel on 2 different city bus routes as well as transfer downtown. Hauling myself out of bed at 5 o'clock that morning, I would put on all new clothes and a pair of nice earrings, unsure of how any of it would be received on the other end of my bus trek. I had eaten breakfast, having no idea where lunch would be. I said goodbye to my parents, unclear on whether I would even still be myself at the end of the day. High school was meant to be transformative, and Whitney Young for me was pure frontier. The school itself was striking and modern, like no school I'd ever been, made up of three large cube-shaped buildings, two of them connected by a fancy-looking glass skyway that crossed over the Jackson Boulevards thoroughfare. The classrooms were open concept and thoughtfully designed. There was a whole building dedicated to the arts with special rooms for the choir to sing and bands to play, and the other rooms that had been outfitted for photography and pottery. The whole place was built like a temple for learning. Students streamed through the main entryway, purposeful already on day one. There were about 1900 kids at Whitney Young, and from my point of view, they appeared university older and more confident that I would ever be, in full command of every bench cell, powered by every multiple choice question they would nail on the city-wide standardized test. Looking around, I felt small. I would have been on one of the older kids at Brian Mayer and was now among the youngest of the high schoolers. Getting off the bus, I would notice that along with their books bag, a lot of the girls carried actual purses. My worries about high school, if they were to be catalogued, could mostly be filed under one general heading: am I good enough? It was a question that dogged me through my first month, even as I began to settle in, even as I got used to the pre-dawn wake-ups and navigating between buildings for class. Whitney Young was subdivided into 5 houses, each one serving as a home base for its member and meant to add intimacy to the big school experience. I was in the Gold House, led by an assistant principal named Mr. Smith, who happened to live a few doors down from my family on Euclid Avenue. I had been doing odd jobs for Mr. Smith and his family for years, having been hired to do everything from babysitting his kids and giving them piano lessons to attempting to reindeer untrainable puppy. Seeing Mr. Smith at school was a mild comfort, a bridge between Whitney Young and my neighborhood, but it did little to offset my anxiety. Just a few kids from my neighborhood had come to Whitney Young. My neighbor and friend Terry Johnson had got in, and so had my classmate Shaika, whom I had known and been in friendly competition with since kindergarten, as well as 1 or 2 boys. Some of us rode the bus together in the mornings and back home at the end of the day, but at school we were scattered between houses, mostly on our own. I was also operating for the first time ever without the tactic protection of my older brother. Craig, in his ambling and smiley way, had conveniently broken every trail for me. At Brian Moore, he had softened up the teachers with his sweetness and earned a certain cool kid respect on the playground. He had created sunshine that I could then just step into. I had always, pretty much everywhere I had gone, been known as Craig Robinson's little sister. Now, though I was just Michelle Robinson with no Craig attached, at Whitney Young I had to work to ground myself. My initial strategy involved keeping quiet and trying to absorb my new classmates. Who were these kids anyway? All I knew was that they were smart. Demonstrably smart, selectively smart, the smartest kids in the city apparently, but wasn't I as well? Hadn't all of us, me and Terry and Shaika, landed here because we were smart like them? The truth is, I did not know. I had no idea whether we were smart like them. I knew only that we were the best students coming out of what was thought to be middling, mostly black students in a middling, mostly black neighborhood. But what if that wasn't enough? What if, after all this fuss, we were just the best of the worst? This was the doubt that sat in my mind through student orientation, through my first session of high school biology and English, through my somewhat fumbling get to know your conversations in the cafeteria with new friends. Not enough, not enough. It was doubt about where I came from and what I would believe about myself until now. It was like a malignant cell that threatened to divide and divide again unless I could find some ways to stop it. Chicago, I was learning, was a much bigger city than I would ever imagine it to be. This was a revelation formed in part over the 3 hours I now logged daily on the bus, boarding at 75th Street and coughing through a maze of local stops, often forced to stand because it was too crowded to find a seat. Through the window, I caught a long, slow view of the south side in what felt like its entirety, its corner stores and barbecue joints still sheltered in the grey light of early morning, its basketball courts and paved playgrounds lying empty. We'd go north on Jeffrey and then west on 67th Street, then north again, jogging and stopping every 2 blocks to collect more people. We crossed Section Park, Highlands and Hyde Park where the University of Chicago campus sat hidden behind a massive wrought iron gate. After what felt like an eternity, we'd finally accelerate onto the Lakeshore Drive, following the curve of Lake Michigan north towards downtown. There is no hurrying a bus ride, I can tell you. You get on and you endure. Every morning, I would switch buses downtown at Michigan Avenue at the height of rush hour, catching a westbound ride along Van Buren Street, where the view at least got more interesting as we passed bank buildings with big gold doors and bellhops standing outside the fancy hotels. Through the window, I watched men and women in straight, smart outfits, in suits and skirts and clicking heels, carrying their coffee to work with a bustle of self-importance. I didn't yet know that people like this were called professionals. I hadn't yet tracked the degrees they must have earned to gain access to the tall corporate castles lining Van Buren, but I did like how determined they looked. Meanwhile, at school, I was quietly collecting bits of data, trying to sort out my place inside the teenage intelligentsia. Until now, my experiences with kids from other neighborhoods had been limited to visit with various cousins and a few summers upstate on day camp at Rainbow Beach, where every camper still came from some part of Southside and nobody was well off. At Whitney Young, I met white kids who lived on the north side, a part of Chicago that felt like the dark side of the moon. A place I've never thought about nor had reason to go to. More intriguing was my early discovery that there was such a thing as an African American elite. Most of my new high school friends were black, but that this didn't necessarily translate, it turned out, to any sort of uniformity in our experience. A number of them had parents who were lawyers or doctors and seemed to know one another through an African American social club called Jack and Jill. They had been on sky vacations and trips that required passports. They talked about things that were foreign to me, like some summer internships and historically black colleges. One of my black classmates, a nerdy boy who was always kind to everyone, had parents who had founded a big beauty supply company and lived in one of the richest high-rises downtown. This was my new world. It's not to say that everyone at the school was rich or overly sophisticated, because that wasn't the case. There were plenty of kids who came from neighborhoods just like mine, who struggled with far more than I ever would. But my first months at Whitney Young gave me a glimpse of something that had previously been invisible. The apparatus of privilege and connection, what seemed like a network of half-hidden ladders and guide ropes that lay suspended overhead, ready to connect some but not all of us to the sky. My first round of grades at school turned out to be pretty good, and so did my second. Over the course of my freshman and sophomore years, I began to build the same kind of confidence I had at Bryn Mawr. With each little accomplishment, with every high school screw-up I managed to avoid, my doubts slowly took leave. I like most of my teachers. I wasn't afraid to raise my hand in class. At Whitney Young, it was safe to be smart. The assumption was that everyone was walking towards college, which meant that you never hid your intelligence for fear of someone saying you talk like a white girl. I loved any subject that involved writing and labor through Precalc. I was half decent French student. I had peers who were always a step or two ahead of me, whose achievements seemed effortless, but I tried not to let that get to me. I was beginning to understand that if I put in extra hours of studying, I could often close the gap. I wasn't straight A student, but I was always trying, and there were semesters when I got close. Craig, meanwhile, had enrolled at Princeton University, vacating his back porch room on Euclid Avenue, leaving a 6'6", 200-pound gap in our daily lives. Our fridge was considerably less loaded with meat and milk, the phone line no longer tied up by girls calling to chat him up. He had been recruited by big universities offering scholarship and what amounted to a celebrity existence playing basketball. But with my parents' encouragement, he had chosen Princeton, which cost more, but as they saw it, promised more as well. My father burst with pride when Craig became a starter as a sophomore in Princeton's basketball team, who play on his feet and using two canes to walk. He still realized a long drive. He had traded in his old Buick for a new Buick, another 225, this one a shimmering deep maroon. When he could get the time off from his job at the filtration plant, he would drive 12 hours across Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey to catch one of Craig's games. By nature of my long commute to Whitney Young, I saw less of my parents, and looking back at it was a lonely time for them, or at least required some adjustment. I was now gone more than when I was home, tired of standing through the 90-minute bus ride to school. Terry Johnson and I had figured out a kind of trick which involved leaving our houses 15 minutes earlier in the morning and catching a bus that was headed in the opposite direction from school. We rode a few stops south to a less busy neighborhood, then jumped out, crossed the street, and hailed our regular northbound bus, which was reliably emptier than it would be at 75th, where we normally boarded. Pleased by our own cleverness, we would smugly claim a seat and then talk or study the whole way to school. In the evenings, I dragged myself back through the door around 6 or 7 o'clock in time for a quick dinner and had a chance to talk to my parents about whatever had gone on that day. But once the dishes had been washed, I disappeared into homework, often taking my books downstairs to the encyclopedia nook of the stairwell next to Robbie and Terry's apartment for privacy and quiet. My parents never once spoke of the stress of having to pay for college, but I knew enough to appreciate that it was there. When my French teacher announced that she would be leading an optional class trip to Paris over one of our breaks for those who could come up with the money to do it, I didn't even bother to raise the issue at home. This was the difference between me and the Jack and Jill kids, many of whom were now my close friends. I had a loving and orderly home, but bus fare to get me across town to school and a hot meal to come home to at night. Beyond that, I wasn't going to ask my parents for a thing. Yet one evening, my parents sat me down looking puzzled. My mom had learned about the friend's trip through Terry Johnson's mom. "Why didn't you tell us?" she said. "Because it's too much money." "That's actually not for you to decide, Mitch," my dad said gently, almost offended. "And how are we supposed to decide if we don't even know about it?" I looked at them both, unsure of what to say. My mother glanced at me, her eyes soft. My father had changed out of his work uniform and into a clean white shirt. They were in their early 40s and married nearly 20 years. Neither one of them had ever vacationed in Europe. They never took beach trips or went out to dinner. They didn't even own a house. We were the investment, me and Craig. Everything went into us. A few months later, I boarded a flight to Paris with my teacher and a dozen or so of my classmates from White Young. We would stay in a hostel, tour the Louvre and the Eiffel Tower. We would buy crepes or fromage from stands on the street and walk along the banks of Seine. We'd speak French like a bunch of high school kids from Chicago, but we would at least speak French. As the plane pulled away from its gate that day, I looked out my window and back at the airport, knowing that my mother stood somewhere behind its black glass windows, dressed in her winter coat and waving me on. I remember the jet engines firing shockingly loud, and then we were rattling down the runway and beginning to tilt upward as the acceleration seized my chest and pressed me backward into my seat for the strange in-between half moment that comes before you finally feel lifted. Hey guys, so I'm going to wrap it up till here for tonight, and I'm in the fifth part of this book. I'll be continuing from the next paragraph. So thank you so much for staying till the end. If you love my content, if you love what I do, please support my journey. Please hit the like, share and subscribe button. And thank you so much for staying till the end. I'll see you tomorrow. Take care. See you. Bye bye. Good night.